Hi everyone, it's Kurt again here with another video. This time we are going to take a look at assessing speaking. Now, you're going to find a lot of similarities from assessing listening. So I'll try not to repeat myself too much, but at the same time, this is a pretty dense chapter with a lot of pages and a lot of information, and I have a lot of slides today, so I'm going to try to go through them very quickly. Again, what I'm showing are the key points in the chapter that I think are important, but also some of the examples. For any of them, as always, if you want to really dive deeper, then make sure you read it very carefully in the chapter and come to class with your questions. All right, here we go. So starting off with our learning objectives, you should be able to state a rationale for assessing speaking as a separate skill and as an integrated one, which we talked about last chapter. You should be able to uncover the overlap between assessing the implicit skill of speaking and the explicit form, focus, grammar, and vocabulary production. So when we're talking about speaking skill, right, we're talking about the actual process of being a good speaker. It's not just grammatical knowledge, right? If you want to be communicatively competent, you need to have grammar knowledge, discourse knowledge, social linguistic knowledge, strategic knowledge. And so sometimes you have to see that those two things overlap, but at the same time, you need to be able to assess them differently too. How to use performance-based assessments. I mean, it's speaking. So if you want to really assess speaking authentically, then there needs to be some kind of performance. Develop assessments that focus on single or multiple micro and macro skills, and design assessments that specifically target one or many of the modes of performance. So today we're going to look at imitative, responsive, interactive, and extensive. And as you make your own assessments, they should be geared towards one or more than one, but typically one at least. Okay, so let's start. What are the challenges in assessing speaking? So first of all, it's very difficult to isolate oral production. As we mentioned last time, it's really rare that you just speak. So here are a couple examples. Maybe if they do a monologue or a speech or storytelling without any questions, without any feedback, that could be considered speaking only. And they put reading aloud, but that's also reading, right? Because you still have to read the words. Second question or problem is the score that you give them indicative of their true oral production without frequent questions or clarifications? And what I mean by that is when you're talking to someone, it's rare that you say something and they're not allowed to question you on what you mean or what your point was. So the actual authentic process or act of speaking is really interactive, right? If I say something and you don't get it, you can clarify, or I can clarify, hey, do you know what this means as well? So without that part, are you giving them a score that really represents their true ability to speak? The third point here is that oral input is very much embedded in interaction, which we talked about before. And the last one, designing appropriate elicitation techniques. So it's really hard to make an oral test that really tests what you want it to. I've seen a lot of times where teachers or student teachers teach a grammar structure and then they want to make it more communicative. So they create a task and then they say, okay, while you're speaking, you have to use this form that we've been practicing in class. But in reality, they can successfully complete the task without using the form. And so they will do that sometimes because maybe it's not normal for them to use that form. But then the teacher will give them a bad score because they didn't include the form in their speaking. But it's really inauthentic to do that because how many people, when they talk, while they're creating their impromptu speech, how many people are able to say, don't forget, I need to use the past perfect while I'm talking? It's really inauthentic to plan speech that way. You speak whatever comes to your mind. So if you're trying to assess on grammar points, you need to design a task that really elicits those grammar points without any chance for the student to skip it and still be successful. This is a challenge. Okay, so here we go. We'll quickly go over the 4 types of speaking. You saw them in listening. And actually, for this part, I'm just going to give a short definition. And then in the second half of my slides, my talk today, I will give some more specific examples from the book. So the first one is imitative. Now, this is the speaking part, not the listening part, right? So the performance is the ability to imitate a word, a phrase, or a sentence. Won't go any longer than a sentence. Sometimes a sentence is already too long. What we're mostly interested here in is their pronunciation. So listening's only role here is for short-term storage. That's why you don't want to go longer than just a short sentence, because then it becomes something more than just limited listening and memory. Okay, the next one was intensive. So here's where you produce short stretches of oral language. We are assessing competence in a narrow band of grammatical, lexical, or phonological relationships. There can be interaction, but it's very, very limited. So you are able to actually ask them a question in order to prompt it, but it shouldn't be anything where there's a lot of communication. So typical ones are directed response tasks, read aloud, sentence and dialogue completion, picture cued tasks, and simple translation up to the sentence level. Okay. The second one is responsive, which includes interaction and test comprehension at limited level of short conversations, standard greetings and small talk, simple requests and comments, and so on, something like this. The stimulus is usually a spoken prompt for authenticity, right? Because this is responding. So it should be something that they hear and then they respond to. Not always, but mostly. It's more authentic that way. So here are some examples that the book gives. We got a short conversation between Mary and Doug, teacher and student, and then Jeff and Steph. This is what responsive listening items would look like. Something very easy where maybe the teacher plays the role and the student plays the other role, or maybe you have 2 students play the roles and the teacher observes. However you want to do it. If you want to save time and make your test more practical, it's good to get 2 or 3 students together at once and have them interact with each other. Instead of you asking the question, the students can ask each other. Okay, the next one is interactive, which is kind of self-explanatory. This is longer and more complex interactions than responsive and can include multiple exchanges or multiple participants or both. And remember that we can have 2 major types of interaction. It can be transactional, where we're trying to get information or, for more formal purposes, or interpersonal, which is, sharing feelings or other things like that. And remember, we mentioned last time that interpersonal are more challenging because you use colloquial language, there's emotion involved as well. Okay, and then we have extensive. So the tasks include speeches, oral presentations, storytelling. Interaction is limited usually here, and the language style is usually planned, more formal, maybe not for storytelling or impromptu speeches, but in general, it's a different type of discourse that the students are asked to produce. Okay, so here are the micro skills of speaking. I'm not going to read them all, but you have them in your book. What's important is, just like I said in listening, as a teacher, you should be promoting these skills in class and then also trying to assess them. And when you base your course objectives and your assessment objectives, you should refer back to these. So these are the micro. There are 11 of them. And then the macro. Okay. So quite a few here. You can see the last one, it includes things like facial features, kinesics, body language, nonverbal cues. So actually, these are things you can practice in class, right? How to use body language and facial expressions to communicate. And then the last one is speaking strategies. Okay. So let's move on to actually designing assessment tasks. So we're going to start with imitative speaking. Now, all of these are in the textbook. So as I mentioned, anything that I don't cover, it means that I thought this was enough, or maybe I didn't think it was as relevant for our class. But I mean, go back and read it all and make sure that you don't have any questions. Okay, so here. For imitative speaking, assessment items are acceptable, but shouldn't be the entire basis of your assessment. And that means that we shouldn't have an entire speaking test of listen and repeat. There should be some more genuine type of production. But here's what you can do. So you can have word and sentence repetition tasks. These are minimal pairs at the beginning. So the test taker will hear this. Repeat after me. Beat, bit, bat, that. And of course, you pause between each word to allow them time to produce it. And then full sentences. I bought a boat yesterday. And they repeat. I bought a boat yesterday. The glow of the candle is growing. When did they go on vacation? Do you like coffee? So you can see the last two are about intonation, right? Information question, falling. Yes, no question, rising. So you see, you can assess a lot of things here. Their ability to produce consonants, vowels, ending sounds, maybe even the tense, like I bought a boat yesterday. Maybe they don't know what that means. They might even say I buy a boat yesterday. We've got our clusters. The glow of the candle is growing, so GLGR. And then, like I said, the last two we're assessing the intonation. Could be, because they're not answering the question, right? They're just repeating what you said. Okay, the next one. Oh, this is, the book shows all kinds of different scoring criteria you can use. So here's one they suggest for repetition tasks, just a very simple scale from 0 to 2. 2 is acceptable, 1 is partially correct pronunciation, it's comprehensible, and 0 is total silence or just really, really, really bad. I think at this level, most students will get at least a 1 unless they just refuse to speak, and then it has to be 0. And again, you should show students this before you do your assessment. Let them know that this is what the level is going to be, so that as long as they say something and you can understand it, for sure they're going to get 1, which is very close to 2. And so even an outstanding student, the best it could get is 2. It's a good way to motivate students. Okay, the next thing the book talks about is this Versant speaking test. They show that in this test is designed to show that actual listening and repeating, this type of imitative speaking, can, through research, they've proven that it can show that if you do well on this, you can be a competent speaker. But I'm not going to spend talking about it. You can scan this and you can go inside and check it out for yourself. It's an interesting test, and I think you could probably get some assessment ideas from it. Okay, moving on. Intensive speaking now. So moving on to the next level where they need to produce at least a short utterance, and these tasks are typically cued, which means there's some kind of input, often it's oral, and they hear it and then they respond. So these are also called limited response tasks or mechanical tasks or controlled responses. And why they're called controlled responses is because they're not too open-ended. I want you to practice the past tense. And so I ask you a question that controls your output so that you are going to focus on the past tense. This is what I was talking about before. So directed response tasks, test takers will hear this. Tell me he went home. And then the test taker has to say, he went home. Tell me that you like rock music. I like rock music. Tell me you aren't interested in tennis. I'm not interested in tennis. So you can see there's grammar here, right? He went home. I like rock music. I'm not interested. Tell him to come to my office at noon. Come to his office at noon. So now we've got pronouns, and then remind him what time it is. And then this is time. It is whatever o'clock. So you can see each question has a specific grammatical function that the test giver wants them to produce. Okay, the next one is a read aloud task. So this includes reading beyond the sentence level, maybe at most one paragraph or two. This is used on a lot of the standardized tests as well. This is from the PTE. This is the Pearson Test of English. And there's an example here. So students have to read it, and then they're scored like this. So this is the read aloud scoring scale. Each replacement, omission, or insertion of a word counts as one error. And then maximum score will depend on the length of the item prompt, so how long the paragraph is. But you can see here they have a scale from 0 to 5. So pronunciation, 5 is native-like, and 0 is non-English. So you have to be pretty bad to get a 0. And then for oral fluency, oops, there's a spelling mistake on native there. Should be native-like and then down to 0 non-English. Now, just using a scale like this as a teacher, you have to be really careful because you still don't really know what these mean. What is oral fluency? So if you are going to put fluency down, you have to create a definition. What does fluency mean? Does it mean how fast you read? Does it mean how well you're able to read without ever making a mistake? Now, there are lots of definitions out there, but for me, fluency means you're able to talk without pausing. And we always pause in certain areas, but being able to talk without pausing too much, that's what fluency is. And then pronunciation, what are we looking at in pronunciation? So you have to really, actually, to use these kind of scales, you need a lot of experience or you need some training. So if you're going to adapt or adopt something like this, you need to actually sit down and define it yourself. What is pronunciation? And what are all the different parts you're going to be listening for? This is quite challenging sometimes. Okay, here is a dialogue completion task. So test takers will read and hear. So they're getting two forms of input here. It could be CD or it could be the teacher who reads it, and they are the customer. So the test taker has to respond with the appropriate lines. So see, it's still controlled, because if you look at the first one, may I help you? So obviously the student needs to be able to preview this first, right? And then they look down at the salesperson's next answer. Okay, what size do you wear? How about this green sweater here? So it has to be something about a sweater or a shirt that the customer wants to buy. Okay, so you can see this would take a little bit of planning before they say. Now, the question on this type of task is, again, is this just speaking competence, or are they also tapping into, reading, listening? There's a lot going on here. Okay, the next one is a dialogue completion. The advantages and disadvantages of the dialogue completion task. As the teacher, you have more moderate control of the output. It's not totally open-ended. You can still try to control the forms that they use. But as I just mentioned, the item relies on reading literacy. And the item is contrived and inauthentic. So this type, it's just not very real, right? Even though we're trying to replicate a real conversation, it's totally made up. And so, what is it really telling you once you get your results? Role play may be more effective in that the students could have more creativity. But the thing with role play is, are they going to use those grammatical forms that you want them to use? Do you really have to think about what your objectives are? Okay, the next is directed response tasks. So here are the same type. This one's a little bit more open-ended. It's more authentic. So there's a test taker and an interviewer. What did you do last weekend? And what will you do? And then you see the test taker also has to ask the interviewer questions as well. It is more authentic, but we're starting to cross the line into responsive with this type. Okay, then we have our picture cue task. So there's a lot in here. I'm going to try to go through them quickly. This would be minimal pairs. So instead of listening and repeating, the students have to say them on their own, right? Sheep or ship, wine or vine, minimal pairs. And in this one, The test administrator might point to the picture, test taker will hear what's this, and they point. Okay, another one would be comparatives. So they have to look at the picture, and the prompt is use a comparative form to compare these objects. So the woman is taller than the man. The grapes are more expensive than the apples. The chair on the right is smaller than the chair on the left. It's not a sofa. Okay, next one. Picture cued elicitation of future tense. So now I want to use the future tense. So how do I do it? It's with the questions and the pictures. So if you see down below, they're going to the airport. Look at question number 2. I point to the father and I say, what will he do in Hawaii? He will play golf, right? So you're really controlling that the students use the form you want. Okay, the next one is picture cued elicitation of nouns, negative responses, numbers, and locations. So you can see you could use these for anything at all. So we're pointing at different things we want to test. What's this? What's this? What are these? What's that? So, we're doing this and that, these and those. We've got a yes/no question in singular and plural. Is this? Are these? And then we've got a yes/no question. Is she sitting? No, she isn't. A negative response. And then we've got numbers. So how many chairs? How many women? Where's the tablet? So for those questions at the end, I'm not actually pointing to those things. I'm just saying in the picture, how many chairs are there? So they have to know the noun and they have to do the grammar right. And the very last question you can see gets even more difficult in that you point to one person and say, describe this person. So now it's not just one particular form, it's more creative, open-ended, even though it's controlled based on what they look like and what they're wearing. So typically this type of assessment will start very simple and then they'll get more difficult towards the end. So at least the lower level students could get something in the beginning. And this type of test, as they get more difficult, you may find that after question 7 or 8, maybe some students can't continue because they just can't answer anymore. Okay, this is another picture cued elicitation. This time is responses and descriptions. So you can see these are a little bit different. I point to the painting on the right. When was this one painted? Which painting is older? How much does this cost? Which one is more expensive? So we're doing our comparatives here. Which one would you buy? Why? Persuade me to buy it. So this one's a little bit more challenging. There's got some controlled and some open-ended. And then map cued elicitation, so giving directions. Give me directions to the bank. Give me directions to Macy's. How do I get to the post office? So same question with a different form. Can you tell me where the bookstore is? And then how do I get to the library? So basically all from the map. Students have to tell you turn right, turn left, go on what street. So again, in this type, you have to be careful what your scoring is going to be. Is it mostly on the accuracy? Is it the grammar? Did they practice the grammar? Do they know how to do this before you give them the test? So for scoring, the book says, you can use this scale from 0 to 2, very similar to the imitative one we looked at before, but it's a little different in that you've got more criteria now. You've got grammar, vocabulary, comprehension, fluency, pronunciation, and the overall task itself. So are the weights going to be the same? Are you going to record it so you can go back and listen to it later? You have to think about these things beforehand. Okay, another type of intensive is translation, but this is only at the sentence level. For us, for you in Taiwan, because English is not your first language, translation is a real, meaningful, communicative device. I mean, that's what you do. If you ever go with me somewhere outside, you will have to translate for me sometimes because my Chinese is not good enough. The same of all native speakers. And you may also translate, probably this has happened already, for your own friends and family who maybe don't have strong English like you do. It is a true communication strategy, so why not use it for assessment? The advantages for assessment item is that you have the control of the output, right? Because you give them the sentence. Now you can say it in Chinese or you can write it in Chinese, and then they have to say the English. So scoring is easier to specify. I strongly recommend that you translate from Chinese into English and make them say the English, not the other way around. Okay, responsive speaking tasks. So the first one we're going to talk about is question and answer. So it's a little bit more than what we just did in the intensive. Now it's some kind of response. So you can have one or two questions or many. You want to maybe have both display and referential questions. Maybe you start with the display and then move on to referential. The thing is, as the test designer, you have to know why you're asking these questions. What's your purpose and what's the objective? Don't just have random questions that are not connected to what they're learning or doesn't match the learning objectives that you've set for your students. Okay, so here's an example of some questions that you could use. This is a type of interview. What do you think about the weather today? What do you like about the English language? Why did you choose your academic major? See, these are very open-ended, so they're not controlled like in the previous type of speaking. What kind of strategies have you used? And then you see once we get to number 5, now you have to have some skill as an interviewer, because if they answer no, you need to have another follow-up question. This is what we call a semi-structured interview, because based on their answer, you may need to change your question. So B, what other countries have you visited? What if they say none? Why did you go there, right? It doesn't make sense. So you have to be able to have some flexibility in the way that you ask your questions. Now, since it's responsive, it's not extensive yet, the test takers respond with just a few sentences at most. They're not expected to talk for like 5 minutes or anything like that. So this is very similar to GEPT at the intermediate level. I know they throw a few questions like this out. Okay. Oh, sorry. My brain stopped for a second. So another one you can do is have the test taker make the questions. So in this case, the test taker will hear, do you have any questions for me? Ask me about my family or job or interest. So same thing, when I ask them, do you have any questions for me? Maybe they got lots. I don't need to jump in and help them. But if they don't have any questions for me, then I need to prompt them still. So ask me about my family. If you could interview the president or prime minister of your country, what would you ask them? And maybe you need to have a few more after that. And this time, they respond with questions. Now, it's not interactive, so I don't follow up and keep talking about it and then have them respond. It's still just responsive speaking. So I ask for a question, they make the question, and then we move on to the next one. Okay, another type you could do is giving instructions and directions. So the test administrator will pose a problem or a prompt, and then the test taker responds. So here's an example of eliciting instructions or directions. The test taker will hear something like this. There's many more in the book. I just wrote 4 down. Describe how to make a typical dish from your country. Or what's a good recipe for making bread or cookies or something. How do you access email on a computer? So you see, I want the process. First, turn on your computer. Second, go to the Gmail page. Third, log in. You want to test them on their ability to very clearly and structurally and in the right order tell you how to do something. How would I make a typical costume for a Moon Day celebration in your country? Something like that. Okay, and then of course the test taker has to respond with their instructions or directions. In this type of task, it's really good because giving directions is very hard to do in a foreign language. But you should never ever let the students prepare in advance or they'll just memorize it. And now it has nothing to do with their speaking ability. And you have to make sure that the topic is common knowledge for all of the test takers. They have to be able to do it. If they don't know anything about it, then they're dead. And your topic should elicit the appropriate difficulty of output you're looking to assess. If you want them to talk for 10 minutes, but you ask them, please tell me how to make a sandwich. maybe they can't. Maybe that's just 3 steps and it's done. Take out the bread, put butter on the bread, put the lettuce and meat inside, cut some cheese, put it together, eat it. It's so simple. So you have to make sure that what you ask them to do, they're able to give you the appropriate amount of output. Okay, another type is paraphrasing. So what you can do is have them paraphrase a story or a description. So test takers will hear this, and then you have them paraphrase it in 2 or 3 sentences. This is a very challenging type of task, but can really test their ability to produce language. Okay, or you could do one that's a little bit more authentic in that they paraphrase a phone message. So this is something in life that we do, right? Hey, tell your mom I blah, 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 and then you give the message, and then you have to relay that message to your mom. Okay, so here's the message that they hear, and then same thing, they have to paraphrase in 2 or 3 sentences. So talking about paraphrasing, the advantages are that they elicit short stretches of output and they promote conversational skills because it's like reported speech by using your own words. But there are some questions here that we need to consider. Is this more of a listening task than a speaking task? Is it more memory than linguistic ability? Is it testing the grammatical ability to produce reported speech? And how's scoring determined? So you have to make sure the objectives of your task are very, very clear. Another type of, moving on to interactive now. Okay, so in interactive speaking, one that we can do, which is probably the most common, is to do an interview. And if you do this, it's probably best if you record it. And what's great about today's world is you could also do it through like Google Meet and record it. And Google Meet also has a transcription function. So you can have it all recorded for you so you can actually go back and look at everything that they've said. That way you can give them a more accurate assessment. And you can be assessing them on any of the following parameters: pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary usage, fluency, social linguistic or pragmatic appropriateness, the accomplishment of the task, or comprehension. Both ways. Did they comprehend, and did you comprehend as well? So if you're going to do an interview, one of the suggested methods is to follow the 4-stage interview. So stage 1 is the warm-up. So in this stage, you start with some small talk, and you probably don't assess or grade this part. This is just to lower their anxiety, let them feel confident, get them warmed up speaking some English. And then the next level is the level check. So this one should be more basic type, and they should be able to answer all of these, again, increasing their confidence for when we get to the more difficult questions. So test taker answers with WH questions or produces a narrative without interruptions. You could read a passage aloud. You could tell how to make or do something, or engage in a brief, controlled, guided role play. The main point here is, like I said, you want to let them be successful at this part. Because if you start with a question that's too hard, they're already scared. They already feel like they're gonna make a mistake. My speaking's not good. And so if you start with something that's too hard, then they're gonna stop trying. They're what we call the affective filter in their brain is going to go out of control, and they're not gonna be able to give you optimal performance. Remember, when you're giving a test, one of your jobs is to do it in a way that they will give their best performance. So the order of the questions is important, especially for speaking. Okay, then we move on to probe. So here's where the questions get more difficult. The test taker could respond to the interviewer's open-ended questions on possibly obscure topics intended to pose a challenge. You could ask them to talk about their own field of study or profession. Engage in a longer, more open-ended role play with the interviewer, or give an impromptu presentation on some aspect of the test taker's field. Then at the end, have a wind down. Again, you won't score the wind down, just like you won't score the warm-up. And here's where maybe you can talk about your feelings about the interview, give them some positive feedback, tell them they did a good job, give them some information on the results, like when are they going to get their scores, When are you gonna talk about it? Things like that, and see if they have any further questions. They might have questions for you about their performance. It's good to talk about it at that time. Okay, so if you're using an interview, the success of it depends on some factors. Clearly specifying administrative procedures of the assessment. So you need to think about this for practicality. For validity, you need to focus the questions and probes on the purpose of the assessment, and they need to match your learning objectives. Appropriately elicit an optimal amount and quality of oral production. So you are trying to get their best performance. And also minimizing the possibly harmful effect of the power relationship between interviewer and interviewee. This is tricky. As a teacher, you are interviewing the students. This can really affect how they produce, because first, they might not be comfortable to sit down with you. What if it's like, I'm a man and you are a young woman? Maybe you don't feel comfortable to sit with a man in a room together alone, or whatever other real life factors are there. That can already affect your performance. But the other part of that is maybe you're embarrassed to do a poor job in front of your teacher, and so you have so much anxiety. So you really have to deal with this, and that's why we have the warm-up stage. Let them feel more comfortable before you jump into the interview. Let them know, hey, don't worry, we're just having a casual talk. It is going to be so easy. Let them get their anxiety down. And then, of course, you have to create a consistent, workable scoring system. Now, the book, I didn't put them in the slides because it's just too much information, but 184 to 186, there are some that they use for interviews. No matter what style or type you use, just make sure it's well thought out, and you got to ask yourself, what is it that I want my students to do in this interview? What is it I want them to show me? And make sure that's what you're assessing, and that, again, they're able to give you the output that you want based on the questions that you're asking. Okay, another one you can do is role play. Role plays are great because they're actually able to integrate their own creativity into their responses. And you can also let them rehearse, which is good washback because they're focusing on the language, they're practicing their speaking. They can become actually better speakers just from the practice stage, right? Practice makes perfect. And it can reduce anxiety because they've had a chance to perform, and it allows them to create that other identity, like role play. I get to play a different role than myself. And actually, it's less scary to pretend to be somebody else than it is to be yourself when you're talking in front of a class. If I get to play the idiot with bad English, that's great because now I don't have to show you my real voice or my real personality. For a lot of students, actually, that's a good way for them. However, this could be good, this could be bad. It creates a more complex interaction that replicates real life communication. So it can be challenging for students, but it's definitely more authentic. Okay, another thing you can do is have discussions and conversation. Now, so you have to think about, you create a classroom environment where it becomes a class discussion, where students are questioning each other and they're talking and they're having some back and forth. Now, I'll be honest, this would be really hard to do in a Taiwanese classroom unless it's structured and everybody has a job and they are required to ask questions and they are required to give feedback. But if you're able to structure it, so you have to really organize and structure this very well. But if you're able to do it, here's the authenticity and spontaneity that other assessments could never do because it's just a real class discussion on a topic. Maybe debate could fit in here as well. So you can look at the different things you can assess, things that you usually can't. How do they nominate the topic? How's their topic maintenance? How do they terminate a topic? How do they get attention? How do they interrupt? Can they hold the floor? Can they control? Do they clarify, question, paraphrase? Are there comprehension signals? Like, things like that. Can they negotiate meaning? Are they able to use intonation patterns? And on and on. Politeness, formality, social linguistic factors, body language, proxemics, all of that, are they able to use those? And you could assess them. But it's very challenging, I think. Okay, you can also use games. The book gives a few games. I didn't put them in here. But basically, you could use any type of game in which they have to use language to solve the problem or complete the task. So you have to create the criteria, and it must be carefully designed, and their linguistic output must match the learning objectives. I know I keep saying that. And the game must elicit the target language or the learning objectives that you hope for. That's the challenge. You can ask them to play a game, but they may not say anything that you need them to say in order to assess. So you have to make sure that the way that you set the game up, they have to use that language in order to complete the task. Okay, so let's get into extensive speaking then. So of course that extensive speaking is long stretches. Typically, we're thinking about presentations, monologues, speeches, things like that. So oral presentations are common, and you should have, one way you can assess it is to have a checklist, and you can give a number to each box according to your assessment. So this one is a scale of 3 to 0, excellent, good, fair, and poor. And then for every one of those, put a score there. So the purpose or objective of the presentation was accomplished, 3, like that. And then you can go down the list. Again, this might be hard to complete in real time, so you may have to record them if you want it to be very, very authentic. Now, as a teacher, it's much more appealing to just give a holistic score. And I'm guilty of this too, because in real time, you have a very good feeling for how well they did. But the washback's not good for the students, and I recognize that. So if you're able to create this type of checklist or assessment criteria, it's much more beneficial for the students. Okay, you can use picture-cued storytelling like this type. Tell the story that these pictures describe. This is a very common one, right, for standardized tests. And 2 last ones, you can have students retell a story or retell a news event, or you can have them translate extended prose. Maybe they hear a whole paragraph, or maybe they hear a whole story in Chinese and they need to paraphrase it in English. So of course, for any of these extensive speaking tasks, you have to make sure that you have very clear scoring criteria for the students. Okay, that's it. We are finished. Assessment of speaking. I hope that was okay for you. And take care, everybody. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.